Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a 59-year-old geopolitical strategy and, maybe more importantly, how it directly hits your bank account.
All right, to really understand the stakes here, let's paint a picture. Imagine this. It's 3 a.m. in Washington. The President of the United States, well, he's not reading a briefing or talking to generals. Nope, he's on social media. And then boom, this message appears. No context, no explanation, nothing. But you know who doesn't wait for clarification? The financial markets. They react, and they react instantly.
In just 8 minutes, the price of oil absolutely skyrockets. We're talking from $78 to $130 a barrel. Over in Singapore, investors are opening their terminals, and what do they see? A market in total freefall. And believe me, it's not just oil. Across the pond in Europe, the Italian BTP spread, which is basically a huge red flag for risk, it widens by 18 basis points before most people have even had their morning coffee. So you've got to be asking, what is going on here? How can one post do all that? Well, this isn't just some random market panic. This, right here, is the modern-day result of an old Cold War strategy, now being played out for the whole world to see. And it's called the Madman Theory. Okay, to really get a handle on this, we've got to go back in time. Let's rewind to the 1950s. Picture it. The entire world is living under this constant, terrifying shadow of nuclear war. Totally caught in the crossfire between two giant superpowers. So the big problem the Madman Theory was trying to solve was, well, it was a huge one. How do you convince your enemy that you're actually willing to use a nuclear bomb when they know it means you'd get wiped out too? It's mutual destruction, right? The answer the strategist came up with was, well, it's pretty simple and honestly pretty chilling. You have to convince them you're just crazy enough to do it. And get this wasn't some idea cooked up by a politician in a back room. Nope. It was born in academic labs at places like Harvard and the Rand Corporation, and the first person to really test it out in the real world? President Eisenhower, trying to break the stalemate in Korea. And who was right there, watching and taking notes? His vice president, a guy named Richard Nixon. So the way this whole thing works is actually pretty straightforward. It's a simple 3-step logic. The goal isn't to have a rational talk. It's to completely replace negotiation with pure fear. You have to make your opponent believe that the cost of not caving to you could be, well, absolute catastrophe. Okay, so fast forward a few decades. The theory gets a new lease on life, but in a way its creators probably never, ever imagined. It finds its most famous modern practitioner in Donald Trump. And boy, did he put his own unique spin on it. And this is where it gets really interesting. See, Nixon, for the most part, he failed at this. Why? Because the world saw him as a sharp, calculating guy who was just acting unhinged. It was a performance. But Trump, he was seen completely differently. He didn't really have to convince anyone he was volatile because the media did that job for him every single day. And here's the other huge difference. Nixon's strategy, it was super secret, totally covert. Trump's, on the other hand, was practically a public announcement. He literally explained it to his UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, before a big meeting with North Korea. He even told his attorney general that the secret to a good tweet was the right amount of crazy. For Trump, you see, the madness wasn't just the method, it was the message. And this performance, it became so believable that it started having real effects, even inside his own government. We're talking about officials who worked for him saying that the Pentagon actually stopped showing him the full menu of military options. Why? Because they were genuinely afraid he'd pick the most extreme one on the list. But, and this is a big but, there's a fatal flaw baked right into the Madman Theory. If you play the part of the madman over and over and over again, your opponents stop just seeing madness. They start to see a pattern. You can see this perfectly after a series of really dramatic threats against Iran back in February 2026 were followed by a sudden ceasefire. And Wall Street analysts, they came up with an acronym that just went viral. TACO. It stands for Trump Always Chickens Out. And that right there is the core of the problem. If you threaten to blow up the world and then back down, not once, not twice, but again and again, that so-called unpredictability starts to look, well, predictable. Your threats lose their punch, and the theory itself just dies. Okay, so a 59-year-old academic theory. Why should you care about this today? Well, here's why. Because even a failing strategy has real, tangible consequences. And those consequences, they hit your finances. Let me show you how. First up, your energy bill. Every single time this strategy gets rolled out in the Middle East, it puts the Strait of Hormuz at risk. Now, that's this tiny waterway where a whopping 20% of the world's oil passes through. So when that gets threatened, global oil prices spike. And that spike, you feel it. You feel it directly at the gas pump and on your utility bills. Second, we're seeing a huge shift in global finance. For decades, whenever there was a crisis anywhere in the world, where did all the money go? To the safety of the US dollar and US Treasury bonds. But what happens when the US itself is seen as the source of the crisis? Well, that whole calculation changes. Suddenly, capital is flowing to gold, the Swiss francs, and, get this, for the first time since the Korean War, even to China. And third, let's talk military spending. Using this exact madman strategy, Trump managed to push NATO allies to commit to a brand new spending target, 5% of their entire GDP. To put that in perspective, just a year before that, they were all still arguing about whether they could even hit 2%. Now, 5%, that's not just some abstract number on a spreadsheet. It represents a massive shift in how countries spend their money. It means a lot more public debt to pay for tanks and missiles, and that means a lot less money for the things that impact you directly. We're talking healthcare, schools, the energy transition. It affects everything, right down to the interest rate you pay on your mortgage.
You know, it's funny. Years after he resigned, Richard Nixon himself was asked about the Madman Theory. And you know what he said? He denied it. He said his big moves weren't about seeming crazy, they were about being credible. The goal, he said, was for people to believe your threats and your promises. But today, it feels like that idea of credibility has been replaced by a performance of folly. And as global markets get tired of an unpredictable America, the first place the consequences show up isn't in the halls of Washington. It's on your bank statement. So that leaves us with a pretty big question, right? What happens to our portfolios, our pensions, our entire future when that thin line between strategy and total chaos just disappears?